Good morning. I would like to welcome everyone to the EAC's Forum on Disability, Accessibility, and Security in the 2020 elections. Thank you for joining us in person and for those online for live streaming this event. Elections present unique challenges and opportunities for officials across the U.S. The 2020 presidential contest will be no different. During the past few years, the need to safeguard our elections has become increasingly important. At the same time, election officials are working to uphold the accessibility pillars of a private and independent vote for people with disabilities. These rights were established in the Help America Vote Act, HAVA, of 2002, and Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, of 1990. Heightened security must not negatively affect the voting rights of people with disabilities. The U.S. Election Assistance Commission plays a pivotal role in protecting these rights. Today's forum seeks to bring together election officials, people with disabilities, disability advocates, and election security experts. We want to discuss pressing issues to assist voters with disabilities and election officials amidst growing security needs. In the 2018 midterm elections, nearly 14.3 million Americans with disabilities voted across the United States. This number will certainly increase during the upcoming presidential election. Ballots are already being cast for the 2020 primaries by voters with disabilities, and in less than 2 weeks, millions of voters in 14 states will vote in the March 3rd Super Tuesday primaries. As I mentioned HAVA, I'd like to cite the language there, and that explicitly codifies the rights of voters with disabilities. Quote, "The voting system shall be accessible for individuals with disabilities, including non-visual accessibility for the blind and visually impaired, in a manner that provides the same opportunity for access and participation, including privacy and independence, as for other voters," end quote. We must consider the fact that a paper ballot is often not accessible for voters who are blind or visually impaired, have mobility challenges, or have other invisible disabilities. In addition, we must ensure any technological voting solutions offer universal access and do not infringe upon a voter's privacy. People with disabilities have the right to a seamless, integrated, and welcoming voting process at the polls. Technology exists to assist voters with disabilities, and it is vital that we cultivate its advancement with both accessibility and security in mind. As we begin this discussion, it is our hope that voters with disabilities and advocacy groups will benefit from increased consideration as we further the collective dialogue with election officials and those in the security community. Today, we will discuss emerging voting technology for voters with disabilities, ways to better incorporate ballot marking devices into polling place operations, and accessible vote by mail. We will conclude the forum with a discussion of potential next steps to assist election officials. The forum's discussions are designed to receive your input and suggestions and your thoughts. Since the passage of HAVA, election officials have worked to implement the promise of a private and independent vote. 3 of 6 duties assigned to the EAC by HAVA cite assisting people with disabilities as a primary responsibility. Through policy initiatives, grants, and funding for special efforts, the EAC promotes HAVA's access requirements to assist both election officials and voters with disabilities. It is with this charge in mind that we conduct today's discussion. My fellow commissioners and I look forward to today's forum and to a productive time together. Thank you. And I think, Doug Lewis, are you up next?
Am I?
Yes, and it is Doug's birthday today. Oh, are we going to do the pledge? Oh, let's first stand for the pledge. I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, let's do that.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So now I can say happy birthday to Doug Lewis.
Thank you, thank you. Yay, yay.
And we won't ask you how many years, Doug, but we know that you've been in this business for a long, long time.
Oh, God, yes.
And have lots of wisdom to impart to us. Thank you.
In fact, actually, my birthday is the same day as George Washington's, and I was there for his birthday party. So Look, on this journey from pediatrician to proctologist, you kind of end up seeing some of the things that go along in this. And on the election side, I spent probably almost 50 years in public policy work, and out of that, a good portion of that, maybe 35, 40 years of it was in elections work. And I can tell you that there are lots of solutions offered that sound neat, plausible, and most often are wrong when it comes to elections. This is not rocket science. It's actually harder than rocket science. And so when you get to be my age, you kind of start reflecting back on your life a little bit, and you start saying, well, what's my legacy going to be? Well, you know, at my age, at 74, you're not going to start building a new legacy most often. Legacies actually start from when they're the age of some of the youngest in our audience today, and those of you that have started reaching adulthood and in sort of your middle years, that's when you build legacies. To have a 100-year-old oak tree, you got to plant the seeds. You got to plant that seedling and let it grow and let it develop. And in this instance, in terms of accessibility in elections, for far too long, we all took the attitude that that was not a big enough problem for us to have to spend the amount of money that it was going to take to fix the problem. Well, that's not an acceptable answer. Voting in America is a right. It's a given right. It's not a dreamed up right, not a new right. It is a given right. And so if we're going to look at this, we have to say that everyone, regardless of their disability, we have to at least attempt to find out if there's a solution to this. Now, when we first hit 1995, I think was Lighthouser versus the state of Texas, for those with visual impairments, and especially the blind, we ended up with a lawsuit where a judge clearly said, I'm sorry, you can't say that you can't do it. You got to figure it out. And you know, he was right. At the time, we weren't certain how to do that, but he was right. It was one of those where we have to get to the point that we can make this process accessible for all. Because otherwise, if our vote is more important than those who have some form of disability, then what do we do as a society? Don't we denigrate the votes of those who should be able to participate in this? And so it's one of those things that's always frustrated me a little bit. I never figured out why we could say that because the audience that we're talking about, depending on whose numbers you use, runs somewhere between 12% and 16%. That number has now grown geometrically. We're talking about now my generation, those of us who were born from 1946 through 1964. Now, that's a pretty long cohort. It's 18 if you're dividing it, but actually 19 years total when you count 46 all the way through 64. And so we're now geometrically growing that older Americans who have some form of disability. They have either, I now walk with a cane all the time. Standing in line for a long period is just not something I want to do. I mean, I do it. If that's the only option, I'll do it. But it seems to me we got to rethink this. If the visual impairments for all of our older voters, and these are the people who vote the most. And so this is what we sort of have to look at. One of the things we learned when we did from the EAC, and we did one of these well-funded studies, and I appreciate, Commissioner, the fact that you as commissioners gave some $7 million at one point to really look at this whole issue and understand it. We found out in that survey that we did nationwide, 30% of voters with disabilities need some form of assistance versus 10% of the non-disabled. So that means we really have to understand that we're going to need to provide some methodologies in order to allow people to exercise their right to vote? Well, to build a legacy is not so much that you send out with a grand scheme of things. It's day by day, working a piece at a time to get to the point that we actually improve people's lives and make the system better than we found it. It seems to me at some point we need to start figuring out what that's going to cost and how we do it. And thank goodness we have a United States Election Assistance Commission, a bipartisan commission, to advise Congress how to do this. Well, look, I've got a little bit of a throat problem. Your hosts here threatened to cut it if I didn't, stay on time. And so I want to make sure that doesn't have to happen. And I want to always remember that there was a nice saying that you never miss a good chance to shut up. So thank you.
Thank you, Doug. We appreciate it. And as one of the commissioners pointed out, we're surrounded by Dougs up here, so one on the left and one on the right. And here we have, on my right, Doug Chapin, who has been a friend of the EAC for quite some time, also been in this business for quite a while, and I introduce to you Doug Chapin. Thanks for being here, Doug.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I want to wish my friend and colleague, Doug Lewis, a happy birthday. He pointed out that one of my gifts to him today is that I, too, now have gray hair. Other than when we first met. I am going to channel Shakespeare, who once said that brevity is the very soul of wit, and so I'm going to strive to be extremely witty in these opening remarks. I want to thank everybody for being here today. In the work I do at the University of Minnesota at the Certificate in Election Administration program at the Humphrey School, we talk a lot about elections and election administration as an ecosystem, as a network of interconnecting issues and governments and technologies that all work together to serve voters individually and the country collectively. I think that notion of an ecosystem is really important. I think far too often when we talk about issues in this field, and sadly specifically in the area of accessibility, we often frame it as an either-or. As the parent of young actors, I want to channel the spirit of improv and say that rather than either-or, we should be thinking about yes and. There are opportunities as technology emerges, as communities come together, for us to find ways to do all the things that we want to do. Are there hard choices? Yes. Are there necessary trade-offs? Absolutely. But I really strongly believe that we collectively as a community can come together to address the thorniest issues and the most difficult decisions in all of election administration and specifically in the area of accessibility for voters with disabilities. So my role today, if you are of a certain age, will be to channel Phil Donahue or Sally Jesse Raphael, although I don't have the snazzy red glasses. For those of you who are younger, sort of imagine Jimmy Fallon going into the audience during the Q&A segment. But our goal here today, after each panel discusses the big issues, is to get all of you involved in the discussion. And I'll be playing that role a little bit like a professor, a little bit like a talk show host, but hopefully trying to keep the conversation going. A couple of things I will channel Commissioner McCormick. When you are asking a question, please identify yourself. Please be brief. And for the love of all that is holy, please ask a question. On that score, I do want to acknowledge, look, I know there are many big issues in this field, some of which are on your mind, some of which are in the headlines, some of which are both. I think there would be opportunities to spend all day talking about numerous issues. We don't have all day today. And so the goal today will be to at least start the conversation about many of these difficult choices and trade-offs. Our goal today is not necessarily to tell one another what to think, but to inform one another about what to think about. And I hope you'll keep that in mind when we have the discussions going forward. Looking forward to a great day. Other than family and friends, nothing pleases me more than a room full of election geeks. And we are in good company today. I want to thank you all for being here. Look forward to the conversation today. And with that, I'm going to yield 2 minutes and 30 seconds to Chairwoman McCormick.
Thank you so much, Doug. We appreciate you being here. We're going to have our first panel up, a moderated discussion called Emerging Voting Technology for People with Disabilities, and that will be moderated by Commissioner Hicks. So we'll switch out panels. Thank you.